Okay, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We are at the 7 o'clock hour. You wouldn't know it that it is the second day of April. For many of us, we're looking outside to what appears to maybe be December, right? But hey, it is April 2nd, and myself, Amy Elke, one of the trainers here at the Children and Family Services Training Center, as well as Deb DeWitz from Family Resource and Consulting, very much welcome you this evening, and we appreciate you joining in with us. Kind of run through a couple of things here. I'm going to try to make this quick as can be because we do have quite a bit of content to get through tonight, so kind of excited about that. So training hours. I'm going to kind of run through this a little bit quickly because many of you have been a part of our webinars before, and so you're fully aware of how we kind of run our credits. So if you're tuning in live, it's counted as a face-to-face credit. I will be emailing your licensing agency that you and your significant other are present. If you are tuning in as a two-parent household, I ask that you make sure that you either have put that in kind of as your login, or if you could also maybe comment that in the chat box, that would be great. If you are tuning in kind of the recorded version, that's something you'll have to work out with your licensing agents of how you will in turn get credit. We will at the end of the evening be passing on an evaluation. With that, we would love a couple things. We would love advice on really regards to maybe what we should do next time for kind of the third part in our series. We're at series 2 of we don't know how many, right? And so at this point, we're on the second session. We're going to try to see what we can offer in sessions to come. So within that evaluation that'll get emailed to you, we just ask that you in turn kind of just be open and honest. If this really fit your need, great. If you think there's things we could have done different, please share that as well. And then at the bottom of that, there will be an evaluation, or I'm sorry, a certificate, I should say, that you would be able to download and print or screenshot in your phone. Anyway, that is just kind of for your own records. I will, like I said, be emailing kind of the full list of attendees this evening to all the human service zones, our treatment foster care providers, PATH, Lutheran Social Services, we have YouthWorks, our tribal partners. All of those folks will in turn get the list of attendees this evening. If you're looking for social work credit, I would ask that you comment in the chat box or email me after the session and say, hey, I need a CEU form. So kind of trying to run through those quick here so we can get going. Again, we will not be having our cameras or microphones available tonight for participants. Basically, it's just me kind of blabbing at you, and then we're going to have Deb who's going to deliver our training. And so for that, any dialogue or questions, things like that, we ask that you put that in the chat box. And yeah, so put that in the chat box. And if you can't find it, I guess you could maybe give me a holler kind of in the notion of the notion of raising a hand, and I can try to communicate that with you. But it's really just kind of the dialogue box that shows up. Usually if you can kind of tap, if you're on like a device, smart device, a tablet or your phone, if you tap it, you can kind of see the participant list, and then it kind of brings up the notion of chat. If you're on your computer, it's kind of a bubble that says chat box. So hopefully you can find it by all means. As we move forward, last week we kind of shared that we pulled together, meaning Deb and I pulled together and said, hey, what can we do to kind of assist the field in kind of walking through this journey? But none of us know where it's going to go. None of us know where we're going to end or how it's going to end, when it's going to end. And so we kind of pulled together to say, hey, how can we bring some resources to the field? As we shared last week, we don't even pretend to have all the answers, let alone have all the answers, right? Just wanted to provide some type of something, okay? And so with that, I ask you to, take a moment to pause and reflect a little bit on the last week. Many of you have just started rolling out with this notion of remote kind of homeschooling, which is another whole adventure, right? Something none of us planned on, something none of us maybe even signed up for necessarily. But it kind of is what it is at this point, right? We're rocking it and we're rolling and we're trying to figure it out. So I really encourage you to take the next hour to pause for a moment. And like I said, these webinars that we're doing are a little bit different than our standard training center webinars. we're trying to tailor things to your needs and kind of where you need to go. So this is our attempt to tackle some of the questions that were brought up last week between the evaluations and comments in the chat box. So if you weren't here for the first session, that's totally okay. You can find that on our website and watch it after the fact. This isn't a series necessarily that you have to watch in order. So you were totally fine to jump on this evening and soak in kind of the knowledge that Deb is going to share with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Deb. Again, use that chat box for any questions, comments, things like that. And we'll kind of gather at the end to regroup to kind of process some of that. So with that, I'm going to pass you off to Deb, and just want to say thanks for tuning in. I know it's a lot easier said than done to kind of pull this off on a Thursday night after your brains are maybe a little bit fried from trying to manage all you have in the last couple of days. So I don't know, Deb, before we get rolling, if you wanted to say anything else, I see you.
Well, I just wanted to say, when you said you were passing it off to me, you're actually passing it off to a recorded video of me. So if people were putting in the chat box, Deb, please address this, I can't do it tonight. So we have recorded the first 2 sessions just to be sure all the technology was going to work. Part of what we'll look at the end, as she said, we will chat just a little bit for anybody who can stay at the end of the hour. We'll chat a little bit about what you might want to see in future sessions. I found it really distracting that my mouth didn't move with my words last time. So, you know, I might try a live session next time, but we wanted to make sure that everything was going to work for these first 2. So it's actually recorded me. So see you at the end of recorded me.
Okay, good clarification. I know some of you who tuned in last week, we had some beautiful, okay, again, I use that word like sarcastically, it's not a good word, beautiful technology issues with everyone crashing the internet. There's been some nice snafus that way. So that was kind of just one of the main reasons we decided, okay, let's try to do this as smooth as we can. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Deb, and we will tune in at the end.
Well, greetings. My name is still Deb DeWitz, and I'm here again for the second in our series of EmergenFC, Emergency Foster Care, Foster Parenting in the Pandemic, presented by the University of North Dakota and the Children and Family Services Training Center specifically, and I am Deb DeWitz, as I said. What we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to kind of remind ourselves about what we talked about last week, which was that one of the things we have to do when we are in the middle of sort of a crisis time is we have to be sure that we don't get so invested in all the little things that are happening day to day, the details of day to day, that we lose track of what our end goal is. What's the end goal at the end of the field? So just like when you're driving down the highway, you can't look just 10 feet in front of your car. You have to look way into the distance to be sure that you are driving defensively and that you are driving safely. So just a reminder from last week that part of what we're trying to get ourselves to do is to be really focused on what are the important things that we have to keep in mind as we go through this. Now, I know that you've been listening to the news, and I know you know this, but here's the funny thing. As I talk to people, everybody's heard this, but everybody's waiting for another time to prepare for this. So I just want to be sure that you have thought through this, that you need to be prepared for illness in your family. So, yeah, I'm sure you have thermometers. Now, I am not a physician, but I am hearing that they are recommending acetaminophen or Tylenol rather than ibuprofen or Advil. And I know there are people there who say, no, fevers are good. It's the fever that kills the virus. So just that's why you need a thermometer, to be sure that the fever isn't getting so high that it's dangerous. So making sure that you've got these basic goods on hand so that if one of the parents gets sick and the other person is trying to take over, we know where everything is. We need lots of fluids in the house for everybody for everybody to drink. So again, I'm not saying you should go out and hoard things, and you certainly don't need bottled water, but you know, making sure that people have whatever they're going to drink, because when people don't feel good, they're not necessarily going to want to drink what you offer. So maybe having something that won't upset their stomach, but would be something that you can get liquids down them, maybe having some soup on hand. I mean, these are things you already know, but when I talk to people and I say, so do you have these things on hand? A lot of people are going, well, yeah, I'll need to pick them up. No, you need to pick them up now. Making sure that you have some simple meals on hand, because again, this does tend to, it seems as if adults get more sick than kids. So the hard thing is when you're running around with a fever, and for some people this, even though they don't end up hospitalized, they feel pretty sick. So being sure that you got some simple meals on hand in case you're in bed. So whatever your simple meals are, whether that's sandwich meat and bread or whatever. So even though you tend to focus on your kids, I'm trying to get you to focus on what if you get sick, or maybe I should say when you get sick. Again, I'm not a physician, but one thing that some of us have heard is that one symptom that some people have is a lack of taste or smell. So just again, being aware that that may be a symptom you want to look for. And I just really want you to remember, just listening to a news report the other day, over 50% of the people who were hospitalized in Maryland were under the age of 60. So I know that a lot of you look at me, right, and think that, well, it just makes people like Deb sick because she's old. But the fact of the matter is, we are seeing people ending up in the hospital with coronavirus, even if they had no prior medical problems, even if they are young. There was somebody who was hospitalized. I talked to an ICU nurse, somebody who was hospitalized in her 20s or 30s, I don't remember, no medical problems at all, ended up in the hospital on a respirator. So I just want you to be sure that you're not just listening to the news and saying, yeah, this is all going to be about somebody else. This could be about being your family, and it could happen as quickly as this week. So be sure that you are prepared, not just for the things that we're talking about here, in terms of the kids, but prepared in case you get sick. Now, tonight's theme is going to be sort of pick your battles. And the reason I picked that phrase is that I heard it many times this week. So what I did this week in preparation for tonight's presentation, or today's presentation, is I spent some time talking to educators. So I talked to teachers, I talked to social workers who work in schools, I talked to therapists, and I tried to say, okay, I'm talking to foster parents, what kind of things you want them to know from the school's perspective, from your own perspective of working with kids. And they knew that I was doing this presentation for foster parents. So I asked them to specifically think about the kinds of kids that they have seen who have been from foster families. And I cannot tell you how many times they use this same phrase, pick your battles. The problem with saying pick your battles is it suggests things are a fight. And so then I came up with my own thing, which was, but just use stuffed animal type weapons, meaning when you say pick your battles, I don't want you to think of it as a battle. I want you to think of it as, again, we're trying to be soft and encouraging and compassionate with these kids. So remember everything we talked about last week, that life is not normal right now. We are all having to adjust, and so are these kids. So remind yourself again of the adjustment these kids have had to make, right? First adjustment was these are kids that already had trauma from their family of origin or from some family. Then they came to foster care. That was an adjustment. Then the coronavirus came. That's been an adjustment because that's resulted in isolation. It's resulted in now kids are being expected to carry out school tasks at home. These are big adjustments for anybody. But everybody says, well, kids are so resilient. Yes, kids are resilient, but most kids need and like structure. They may not act like they like structure because every time you try to structure them, they complain and moan and groan, but it's something that they need in order for them to grow and prosper and be healthy mentally, is they need structure. All right, so what's changed for us? Well, remember what I said last week? Many of us trying to work from home all day, or if we are in those essential businesses and we are going to work, we're probably working many, many hours and trying to keep the country afloat. And so somebody's home with these kids all day. And now this week they roll out this grand plan that they're going to have us assist the kids with distance learning. So like I said, how are you supposed to do this? I spent the week talking with people, asking people what they thought foster parents needed to know. So 3 concepts we're going to cover in the next 2 sessions. Tonight we're going to do 1 and 2, and that is we're going to talk a little bit about online school, or whatever we're calling it these days, what it is and what it isn't supposed to be, and that it is different with kids that have special challenges. We're going to talk about some simple, basic parenting applications, just to kind of remind you of some things you already know to help you get through the week. Reminding yourself that although you already know these things, in times of stress, we sometimes forget simple things. And again, one of the most important things to remember is you cannot do it all. You cannot do everything. These are not normal times. These are not normal times. Next week, what we're planning to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the responses that came in this past week, as foster parents said, but what about this? Now, we're not going to be able to address specific issues or specific children or specific needs, but what we'll try to do is to take those questions that come in from several people or most people, or that are general in nature, and we're going to try to talk about those in session 3. The only thing that we're not going to be able to do is we're not going to be able to change Deb. So for those of you who said, well, she's kind of quirky or she's kind of cheesy, yeah, she definitely, she's all those things. And so she's probably going to continue to be quirky and cheesy, but there you go. So talking about tonight's or today's topics again, let's compare your school or your child's school to your home. What are the differences here? In school, they have a trained teacher. Whoop, I went ahead and I didn't mean to. In school, they have a trained teacher. And what you have at home is a parent. Now, even if you are a teacher at school, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easier to be a teacher now that school is at home. So, you know, teachers at schools are trained. For most of us, we are not trained in educational theory. We don't know how kids learn best. You know, it takes 4 years for people to become a teacher, and we are supposed to do this over the next 4 days. So please cut yourself some slack. Remember what I said? Use teddy bear type weapons, right? Be compassionate and gentle to yourself. You are adjusting too. What else do we want to know? Kids respond differently at school than they do at home. I cannot underscore this enough. We know this. Those of us who work with kids full time know that kids will respond differently when they are with parents than when they are with their teachers. I used to do a lot of training for childcare providers, and childcare providers would say, well, none of these parents have any discipline in their homes because these kids will be good for me all day. And as soon as the parents walk in the door, the kids just have a meltdown and they pitch a fit and blah, blah, blah. And in the childcare provider's mind, it was because the parents had no discipline at home. And you may have seen some of this when your kids transition from a visit, when your foster kids transition from a visit either at home to the biological home or a visit with their parents at the social service office or whatever. The kids are going to respond differently. That's normal for kids, right? Most of the time, kids respond differently to different people. Why did they give their best behavior to teachers? Many times people will say, you know, they go to a parent-teacher conference and the teacher says, oh, she's such a nice girl. Oh, she does really well. Then they come, but at home, the parents say, are you kidding? So if you have the kind of child who is doing well in a school setting, but then acts out at home, and you're thinking, well, why can't she just behave at home? Because for most kids, their worst behavior occurs where they feel the safest. So why do the kids melt down when mom and dad walk into the childcare setting at the end of the day? Kid has held it together all day. Just like when you are at work, you don't yell at anybody. You know, you don't raise your voice. You don't, right? I mean, we treat strangers better than many people treat their own family. We get more frustrated with our own family. We tend to express ourselves differently to our own family than we do to strangers. So kids are at school all day. They're with a teacher. They're having to hold in, you know, and be good. And when that parent walks in the room, foster parent, biological parent, when that person walks in the room, sometimes it's like they can let go of how hard they've been working to be good. So, you know, now you're supposed to be both. You're supposed to make them sit down. And again, schools are rolling this out differently. Some schools are having kids sign on because they have a one-on-one technology, so that every kid is supposed to sign on to their iPad or whatever they have. Other schools are doing it differently. They're sending a message out to parents and letting them know what the kids are supposed to do. But whatever it is the school is expecting, your kids don't expect you to act like a teacher. Yeah, they're used to you saying, get your homework done, but they're used to having a teacher who can explain it. You are not going to be able to explain everything. Now, most teachers have some kind of office hours, some kind of time where children can ask them questions. So don't try to be the teacher. Yes, you have to get them focused on what they're supposed to be doing for school, but no one, and every teacher said this, no one is expecting you to be a teacher. Now, the other thing is that teachers have standards to meet. They have to do things certain ways. You're just trying to help. So the teachers may be asking you to have the kids do something because it's part of a standard they're trying to meet. But we're trying to help these foster kids. Now, I want you to ask yourself this. Were your foster kids able to meet all the standards prior to this? So again, some of you have foster kids who are struggling academically, who are struggling behaviorally, who are struggling socially. You know, going through this isn't going to make it easier. So while the teacher will have standards to meet, they have to do this many worksheets, they have to do this, they have to do that, you have to balance their educational needs with how they're responding to this trauma, and recognize that you have two sets of standards. How is my child doing academically, but also how is this child doing as it relates to being able to just get through their day? Their focus is on learning, therefore. Your focus is on the whole child. And so I'm sure you've seen this already sometimes where the teacher is very specifically focused on one thing, but you are looking at it from a different perspective. Now, here's a huge one that every teacher I talked to said, they've never done this before. Guess what? You've never done this before. So please be gentle with yourself, be gentle with the teachers. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen on social media this week, people are saying, oh, I'm so in love with my child's teacher. I'll never complain about the school again. I don't believe they can do this with all these kids in the classroom. My kids are driving me crazy, right? But let me tell you something. I was a university professor for the second half of my career, and probably the first 2/3 of my teaching in a university setting, it was in class. It was on site. People were sitting right in front of me. Well, then we began to make the transition to where students wanted online classes because we have lots of students who needed graduate degrees in social work, but couldn't uproot their family and move. And so I had to start teaching online. And I guarantee you, there is a sharp learning curve, meaning that the first time I would teach a class online, I would think, okay, this is all very clear. They know exactly what they need to do for this assignment. I have covered everything I need to cover in this lecture. Guess what? The second time I taught the same exact class, it looked nothing like the first time I taught it. And almost all of these teachers are teaching online for the first time ever. They're going to get frustrated. You're going to get frustrated because none of us have ever done this before. Here's what teachers told me. Expectations have been lowered. I don't mean they don't care about your child. I just mean that both nationally and at your school, they are going to have to relax some standards. So, you know, the teacher who always makes it to the end of the textbook by the end of the year is going to have to relax that standard. The national standards for testing, the national standards for many of those things have been relaxed because of the pandemic. And so, but not everybody knows how to do that. Teachers have never done this before, but they are saying we cannot expect for these kids to learn the same amount in the current setting that they would have learned in the classroom. So they are trying to lower their expectations. But the degree to which your teacher is going to be able to do a good online learning environment is going to depend as greatly as every person is different. So everyone I talked to said the same thing: lower your expectations. Now, that does not mean you don't have to have expectations. Yes, your kids have to work on their schoolwork. Yes, your kids have to complete whatever they can complete. But at first, some people were thinking, well, the kids are going to be going to school all day long. What am I supposed to homeschool them all day long? No, that is not what anyone is expecting. Let's compare homeschool to crisis school, because that's what this really is. Matter of fact, I talked to some homeschool parents this week, and I said to them, what's the difference between homeschooling and what's going on now? And they all said, there's no comparison. As a homeschool parent, those parents said, I researched this for months and months and months. I prepared for months and months and months. But you had no preparation prior to this. So you didn't get to prepare ahead of time. You didn't get to think ahead of time. You didn't get to plan ahead of time for not only for their learning, but for your being perhaps working from home. What else is different? In homeschool, parents mostly choose it. Now, there are some parents who end up homeschooling their kids because of difficulties that their children are having in the school, but you didn't choose to have school go online. And you didn't want this. Now, maybe that you wanted your kids home where you could keep them safe, but we didn't choose to have this educational thing added to our pot. Now, the other thing about homeschool parents is their children are told ahead of time. So the kids know ahead of time, oh, next year we're going to be homeschooling, or when you start school, we're going to be homeschooling. The children are expecting it. These kids had no warning. They had no time to adjust. The other huge difference is that homeschool parents and children are not stuck at home. So if you think homeschool parents stay home to school their kids, that is not what homeschool parents tell me. They do lots of learning out in the community. They have those kids involved in lots of activities, lots of music events, cultural events, sports events. Those kids are on the go a lot. They do a lot of field trips. So they are not stuck at home, and you are all stuck at home. You hear the difference here? Now, they have also worked out schedules for work and school. However they're homeschooling, whether they do it when they get home from their regular job, whether they are a stay-at-home parent who does it during the day, whatever it is, they already have this planned. You did not have this planned. Now, remember again, teachers have not done this before. And I guarantee you, as a person who had to put my classes online, teachers may expect too much. So the second time I taught a class, I almost always pared down the amount of homework I gave students, because what I thought was doable was not. They may think their directions are clear, but they will not be clear. I cannot tell you how many times I worked and worked and worked on an assignment, and I would have pages of description for the assignment, because these are college level graduate courses. So these are pretty complex assignments. And I would be sure the directions were clear. And students would respond to what they thought the directions were. And they really did think they understood, but it wasn't what the assignment really meant. Okay, and teachers might even get a little defensive, right? Sometimes when a student would say, but you didn't tell us that. And I would look back and I would say, but I said, da-da-da-da-da-da. And they'd say, well, but I heard that as, and when they said it to me, I'd go, yeah, you could read it that way, right? But my first inclination would be to say, well, I did tell you that. It was in the syllabus. So teachers have never done this before. They may get a little defensive, and we all need to work on this together. So most important thing I heard from every professional I talked to, teachers, special ed teachers, homeschool parents, school social workers, everybody said, parents, don't think that you are expected to teach your children. You are not a teacher. And remember what we talked about last week? Most kids are struggling now. Your foster kids may be struggling more. Now, here's the thing. I have to say, when I say foster kids, I'm lumping every foster child together as if they're all the same. Well, they are not the same at all. Every child is different.
But here's the thing. I never had somebody say, oh gosh, I have the easiest foster child in the world. No matter what I do, it just works. They never have any behavior problems. They're so good. Everything's perfect. You know what? Those aren't the kids we're trying to help you with. So when I say foster children are struggling, it doesn't mean that every foster child is struggling. But if you have a foster child who's struggling, then those are the ones that we're trying to get you to look at through this lens, because they may struggle more as their trauma gets reignited. Now, here's one thing we all know, everybody agreed on. Kids don't learn from their schoolwork when they're scared. Kids can't learn when people are tense, and kids can't learn when they're struggling. So the biggest fear that educators have is that as they send school out into the homes, that it's going to raise the level of tension in families. That families, in an attempt to get the kids to do things that the teachers can get them to do during the day, and then the kids aren't willing to do it, that they're going to get frustrated. Well, don't you listen to your teacher? Well, yeah, they listen to their teacher, but that's a whole different setting. So you and your child are going to learn from each other during this week what works. You know, a first-year teacher, you talk to any teacher and she will tell you the first year was her toughest year. Or she's a 30-year teacher and then she'll say, oh, that 1 year that I had, 95%, you know what I mean? But for most teachers, the first year is their most difficult year because that's when they're learning, and that's what you need to be doing. Don't presume you know how to get your kids to do all their schoolwork under this new design, because it isn't just about homework now. It's about change. It's about adjustment. Now, your kids cannot be expected to do school all day, nor should they be. I heard of some school districts that were planning to roll out a school day where the kids would sit in front of their iPad or computer and have a full day of school with a teacher in front of their iPad. And we'll see how that goes. But it's very different to have somebody talking to you online than have somebody talking to you who's right there, who can walk over to your desk and say, Deb, how many times, right? So the schools may try some things that don't work with your kids, and you have to watch for that. You have to be in touch with your teacher. Last week we talked about, when you start all this, you expect you're going to have access to all these professionals, social workers, psychiatrists, teachers. You still have access. It's just that it's a tough time for everybody because some of those people are trying to take care of their kids at home as well. But reach out to that teacher, reach out to that social worker, reach out to that mental health provider. So set expectations, yes. You have to have expectations. You have to have schedules. But try to keep your kids' best times in mind. So yeah, maybe they normally go to school at such and such a time. But maybe what you know is that's not their best time. And so even though we're trying to keep schedules fairly similar, and most families are trying to keep their kids on a fairly similar schedule so that, because again, kids respond better to routine, but keep in mind what are your child's best times. I had at least 2 of my kids were ADHD out of the 3, and here's what we knew about them. They were better in the morning than in the afternoon. So when we were looking at schedules, as they got older enough where they could pick a schedule, math and science definitely had to be morning classes, because if they had those as late afternoon classes, there was no learning to happen. So think about your kids' schedule. Think about their best times. Are there kids who are, boy, I tell you what, I have a family that has problems with hanger. You know what hanger is? People who, when they are hungry, when their blood sugar drops, they get hangry, which is hungry and angry. So if you've got kids who struggle with hanger, then right before the lunch period is not a good time to be trying to do homework. So, try to keep in mind, when are these kids' best times? When do they have the easiest transitions? So listen to their behaviors. Listen to their behaviors. And I put in here, think about their IEP. Now, to some people, an IEP is you go to this meeting and everybody sits down and they all talk at you and then you sign it. Or maybe it's called an IFSP. I don't know what it's called in each state.
but almost every school who has a child who struggles, that child may have a special document, a 409 or whatever. And in that document, we're supposed to be talking about what will help this child learn. What do they need? And so there should be some things that you and the school have talked about in the past that help them to learn. So maybe they learn best by hands-on things, right? When my oldest daughter was learning fractions, it just didn't matter how many worksheets we did. There was no learning worksheets, no matter how much we did. When we went to the kitchen and we used fractions in cooking and baking, was like a light went on. All of a sudden she was, I get it. When she would say, well, if you had this many cookies and you had to, when we did division, if you had this many cookies and this many friends came over, how would you split them up? So again, pay attention to how your child learns. Do they learn by application, by hands-on learning? Do they learn best by seeing things? Do they learn best by listening? Because that's some of what you're going to have to pay attention to, is when they're getting frustrated, might there be another way that they could access this information, and can you ask the teacher to give it to them in that way? So think about what you've learned about how your child learns, and think about the kinds of things that that have manifested themselves in school. Why is that? Because if the school says he really has trouble transitioning, well, first off, you're probably seeing that at home too. But if that's the case, then you need to really focus on those transition times. Now, the school is trying to respond to keep your child learning, but don't let the school's attempt to keep your child learning thwart your ability to keep the kids learning. Some of that stuff that we just talked about, that there might be ways that your child might just get too frustrated with what will now seem like enormous amounts of homework, because normally they do that in a class. But since they aren't having these particular classes, it will be, in some instances, what appears to be an enormous amount of homework. And some of your kids get overwhelmed way too easily. They feel like failures. That's one of their trauma experiences, is that they're a failure. They feel stupid. Pay attention. Who is this kid? How does he think about himself or herself? And so are there ways to keep your children learning, even if what the school is asking you to do isn't working out so well in your home? So certainly math worksheets will come out, reading worksheets will come out. But like I said, cakes could be made, dog houses could be built. Somebody said to me once, I haven't used algebra since I left high school. She sews all the time. And I said, well, let's take a look at when you are figuring this, how do you do that? And she was using algebra. She was solving for X, but she didn't think of it in that way because she worked it all out in her head. So I'm just saying, try to find ways that, and again, we're not expecting you to be teachers, but if what you have noticed about your child is they like being involved with you, and there are parts of learning that you can help them with by doing things with them, that is also learning. They're going to learn plenty of things during this time home with you. Not all of it is going to be school related. They're going to learn how to handle trauma. They're going to learn how people respond and adjust. They're going to learn how adults communicate with each other. So social studies worksheets will come out. Yeah, they will come out. But just when I talk to teachers, they said again and again, keep them reading. Just keep them reading. So whatever you can do to get kids to read. And they may not, I was talking to a dad the other day and he said, I'm so sick of Captain Underpants. But his son loves it. And it keeps him reading. It keeps him learning vocabulary. It keeps him focused. So especially for a lot of these kids who are ADHD, the kind of things that you might like to read are going to be way too boring. You look at what Deb DeWitz will read, and yeah, I tell you what, it's got to be pretty enticing. So you look at, what do I watch on TV? What do I read? Murder mysteries. Matter of fact, some people have said, I'm a little scared to be around you, thinking you might kill me. But anyway, do you get what I'm saying? Is that, pay attention to what your kids want to do. And ask your teacher if other things can count. So if you've got a child who's overwhelmed by worksheets or overwhelmed by the things that they need to do, or who, there are some kids who get a little crazy if they spend too much screen time. And this is going to be screen time for some kids. Ask your teacher work with that teacher to see what other things can count. Now, another thing that we're going to do tonight, I promised you we're going to talk about just some general, gentle parenting reminders. Not that you don't know these things, you know these things, but you know what? I'm a family therapist. Does that mean that every time I talk to anybody in my family, I remember all the things I learned? No, I don't. So sometimes we just need to be reminded of some of the things that we know, but when we're stressed, we forget to apply. So one of the things that helped a lot of parents when I used to do parenting classes, one of the things they liked a lot was something that I called red rules. If you're going to set a rule for your children, and they do need rules, they need rules during this time. They also need flexibility, but they need rules. So how do you know if a rule is a good rule? And the way you know it's a good rule is if it's red. And that means, is it reasonable? Is it enforceable? And is it definable? So let's look at each of these one at a time. What is a reasonable rule? A reasonable rule is a rule that a child could be expected to do at this age. So for instance, someone who says to a 2-year-old, you need to go in your room and pick up all your toys. Most 2-year-olds cannot organize themselves to pick up all of their toys with one instruction. So for most 2-year-olds, that's not a reasonable expectation. Now, you may have a child who can. I had one child who could do that. She was very structured. She was very rule-bound. She liked order. She didn't like chaos. So she could do that. But many kids, you have to be thinking about, can this child do that at this age? So when you say, when you're thinking, I want the room picked up. If a child is 2, you might have to say, I want you to go put all of your teddies, well, first off, you're probably gonna have to go in the room with the 2-year-old. I want you to put all of your teddies in this box. And then when the child does, and then you come out and mommy's gonna give you a hug, right? So the child is gonna need to be given a direction and complete a small task and then get a reward, okay? But it isn't just 2-year-olds. So, can a child be expected to do something at a particular age? So a 13-year-old, can a 13-year-old be expected to do multiple worksheets in a row? Maybe not so much at home. So you might like them to get it all done before supper. And that may be what you used to do, but they used to do a lot of those during the day when they had other people working on them at the same time. They had interaction with the teacher. So you've got to look at, what's my schedule? So if you've got the ability to say, yeah, when you get that worksheet done, come on over to me, buddy. I know I'm working on my computer from home, but come on over and we'll take a look at it quick. If you can give them give them a small amount to do and then check in with them, give them that reward, that may work. But if you've got to be focused on your work for a great portion of the day, then they're not going to be able to sit down and do all of those, whatever those assignments are, before supper. So you're going to have to figure out ways to think of, well, what are the things that the child maybe doesn't mind doing? Because maybe they don't mind reading. So you can say, okay, tomorrow during the day, do your homework assignments from today. And then this evening, we're going to have you work on your math. So helping, think through who this child is so that you are realistic and reasonable. Now, last week, somebody said to me, what do you do when you have a kid who's 13, but they act like they're 8? Well, let's talk about the real age of your child. Because there is something that I say all the time when I'm working with families, with social workers who work with families. If you put a paper sack over this person's head, right? If you could not see the person, right? And you just looked at the way they were acting, the behaviors they had, what age would they be? And people are pretty good at looking at it and go, she acts like she's 10. She acts like she's 2. She acts like she's... Now, and I don't mean being snide. I mean, literally, how old do they act? And why is that important? Because remember last week we talked a little bit about Erickson, and the very first stage of development that every baby goes through is that stage of security. So when they cry, an adult tends to them. When they cry, someone feeds them. When they cry, someone changes them. That gives them a sense that they can trust their world. The next stage then is that 2-year-old stage where they begin to develop some independence. You all know about the terrible twos, right? At least that's what we call them, right? But there's more stages after that. There's stage after stage after stage. And when you have a child who's acting younger than their chronological age, and it's not because of a developmental disability, meaning it's not because of a lower IQ, but it's because of what's happened in their past. It's because of trauma. We, in a sense, have to parent them at the age they're acting. So if you have an 8-year-old who acts like they're 5, whose behaviors are like they're 5, in some ways you have to parent them as if they're 5. That doesn't mean you treat them like you're 5. Oh, but boy, you baby, right? No, I'm not talking about you treating them like they're 5, but you would not parent a 13-year-old the same way you would parent an 8-year-old. So you think about, okay, I have a 13-year-old, but she acts like she's 8. So if I think of her as an 8-year-old because she's stuck developmentally at that age, I would be more clear, more specific. I'd use shorter time frames. I'd have different expectations. I still expect her to get her homework done, but I wouldn't expect her to be able to stay at it as long. I wouldn't expect her to be able to be as independent. So when I say, what age are they acting? It might not just be that, oh, well, she's just acting younger than her age. You know, she's acting like a baby. No, they may literally be stuck at that developmental stage. That doesn't mean they have to stay stuck there forever. But again, you may have to adjust your parenting to do good, solid, structured expectations, but expecting something that's younger than what they are and then building on that. Hopefully that made sense. Here's the other thing about trying to do this in a week is that I think I've thought of everything, but like those teachers who are putting things online, you know, then when I look at it afterwards, I go, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I never should have said that. Or I should have made that more clear. And when you don't have an audience in front of you, it's hard to know. When there's an audience in front of me and somebody's going, what? I can tell that I'm not being clear, but I can't tell. The other thing you have to keep in mind is, what are your child's special needs, right? A reasonable expectation for a non-ADHD child might be, go put your clothes away. For an ADHD child, expecting that this child is going to pick up this stack of clothes, walk into their room, put them in the right drawer, close the drawer, and come back out without any interruptions, probably isn't going to happen. Because even though we say it's attention deficit disorder, really these kids pay attention to everything. So when they're walking toward their room with that pile of clothes, they see something on the carpet that looks like cat poop. And then that reminds them that they were supposed to feed the cat, but they didn't feed the cat. So then they head over to try to feed the cat, but on the way to feed the cat, then they look outside and they see a bird outside. And they remember that that their dog was outside this morning. Oh my God, they didn't let the dog in. So do you see what I'm saying about how they pay attention to everything? So they can go, 15 different places with the clothes in their hands and never get them put away. And so it's tempting to yell and say, why don't you ever listen? They did listen. They listened to you, but then they listened to every other thing they saw or heard because they pay attention to everything. It is not attention deficit disorder, it's focus disorder, right? So with an ADHD child, you might have to say, hey, Deb, I need you to put these clothes in your room. And the child, of course, is sitting there like this, and you go, what did I just ask you? Well, let me say it again. Look at me, buddy. Look at me, buddy. Okay, I need you to put those clothes in your room. Okay. When do I need you to do it? I don't know. I need you to do it now, buddy. I need you to take the clothes, put them in your room right now. Okay, tell you what. I'm going to count to 10. I'll bet you cannot get those clothes in your drawer and be back out here by the time I get to 10. Then you start counting, right? And the kid picks up the clothes, and he can hear you counting all the way while he's going in and coming back. That kept him focused on the task. He comes back out, he's been successful. If you say, go put your clothes away, he's not going to be successful. He's going to feel like a failure. You're going to feel like a failure. So be thinking about, what is my child? Who is this child? And when are they successful? You know, do they have anxiety issues? Because if they have anxiety issues, it may be about calming them before you ask them to do something. You may need to sit with them for 5 minutes before they even get on the iPad because they're so nervous about not being able to do this right. So again, in order to have a reasonable rule, you have to really, really, really know your child. What age are they? What are their abilities? How much focus do they have? All of these things are important. And how does that impact your expectation of it being reasonable? In other words, you have an idea of what they should be able to do, but is that borne out in fact? Have they been able to show you those kinds of things? Red rules, right? Reasonable, enforceable, definable. Next one is definable. What does that mean? It means you've defined it clearly. Is it clear to you? But the next and very most important step is to say, what did I ask you to do? And see if it's clear to the child. Most of the time, kids who are ADHD or kids who struggle with trauma or attention of any kind will say, I don't know. And it's tempting to say, listen to me. Well, clearly, however we approach them with this, we didn't approach them in a way that drew their attention. For some kids, you have to touch them before you talk to them. Because if you're not touching them, they're zoned somewhere else, right? They are off in some kind of other place. So you say, so a kid goes, I don't know. Instead of being upset, say, okay, I'm going to say it again. I need you to listen to me this time, buddy. And you might need to be between them and whatever is going on around them. And then, so what did I say? Then you check it out. So you've said, what did I say? And until they can tell you what they need to do, they don't get it yet. Now, the other thing I will tell you is that kids are really smart. I tell you what, a lot of these foster kids have more street smarts than we'll ever have. So if there's a way around something, they'll think of it, right? So they may not be getting great grades in school, but they're kind of street smart, some of these kids. So you say, I want everything. Maybe you used to say, go pick stuff up in your room. You'd go in and all the stuff was, you couldn't see it anywhere. You look under the bed, it's under the bed. Okay, if there is a way to get around this, they'll probably think it up. So here's a question you have to ask yourself. Am I gonna get mad if they outthink me? If you said, get all those toys picked up, but they didn't pick them up, they stuffed them under the bed, they thought you meant you didn't want to see the toys. So if they outthink you, isn't that one form of learning? Right? I mean, one of the things they need to learn to be able to do is problem solve. You can either get mad and say, that's not what I meant. Or you can say, that was pretty clever, bud. Yep, that was pretty clever. So I'll give you that one today because, you know, I said, get the toys off your floor and you did. But the next day, you're going to say, hey, buddy, I want all your toys put where they belong. And when I say where they belong, let's review where they go. This is where the teddy bears go, right? So when they outthink you, instead of being upset, just say, well, it was clever, but it'll be different tomorrow, right? You have to learn how to define things so that your kids know exactly what you want them to do. You've got to be very specific. And, you know, if a kid has been doing something really well and he thinks of a way around it, that doesn't mean he's not going to try to do it more easily. Have any of us ever done that? Yeah, we know we're supposed to hang up our coat when we get home, but haven't you ever tossed your coat? So not only do you need to be specific, but you ask them. Now, what did I ask you to do? Okay, and what are the steps to that? Great job, great listening. Even if it took 3 times before he was able to tell you everything, once they're able to tell you everything, then they have listened. So then, did I get what I asked for, right? When you ask them for specifics, say, this is what I want you to do, you've defined it, and they can tell you what you defined, then they did what they were asked, right? And you reward them. All right, so you know all about rewards. And remember again, every kid is different for rewards. This weekend I was, my granddaughter was working on toilet training, or we were working on toilet training with my granddaughter. And, right now is a time of great behaviorism. So, there's all kinds of, sticker charts and rewards and that's great. Every generation has a way that they raise their kids. And so the third time that my granddaughter went in to use the potty chair and was successful, I said, well, let's get your sticker, because her mommy had all the stickers and the charts and the little prizes. And I said, let's get your sticker. And she goes, nah, I don't want a sticker. I said, well, but mommy said, after you do your stickers, then you get a prize. Yeah, I don't want a prize. So each and every time that she was successful, she didn't care about the sticker. She didn't care about the prize. She wanted to run to mommy and have mommy give her a hug. So this is a kid who's motivated by relationship. But not all kids are, especially some of these foster kids are not motivated by relationship. They are motivated by rewards. So you've got to really pay attention. Again, who's your child? We can't just say this is the way to parent kids, because every parent is different and every kid is different. What else does a red rule have to be? It has to be enforceable. You notice I went RDE, but oh well. Why? Enforceable is that part where you make it clear to the child and what happens if you don't, right? This is my expectation. You've made sure it's reasonable. This is what I told you to do. But if you don't follow that expectation, what happens? So in order for something to be enforceable, they have to know by when. By the time we eat lunch, all your toys have to be picked up. Now they're going to need a reminder. In 10 minutes, we're going to eat lunch and your toys all have to be picked up. In 5 minutes, we're going to eat lunch and your toys all have to be picked up. Timers are great for this, kids need to know, by when do I have to do this? So just let me ask you this. I wish you were all sitting in front of me so I could say, how many of you are procrastinators? Because guess what? Human beings are great procrastinators. They are great procrastinators. So your kids are great procrastinators too. So then what happens if I don't do it or don't do it by then? I need to know that. And I should know that ahead of time. Honey, you need to go put your stuff away. If you don't put it away, then this is what's going to happen. And you need to do it by this time. Now, before we get to what will happen if you don't do it, I have to make sure that you know that you have to be willing to follow through with whatever you say. Sometimes it's tempting when we're frustrated to say, if you don't do it, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. But you got to think through, who's this going to punish more? So when you set a consequence for your kids that makes them really unhappy, you end up as punished as they do. Now, people often say to me, well, yeah, but if it doesn't make them unhappy, they're not going to learn. Not necessarily true. So I want you to think a little bit about what kinds of consequences do I use? And we're going to talk a little bit more about consequences in a minute. Is the enforcement age appropriate? So, we all know if you're going to do a timeout for a child, it should be 1 minute for every year old the child is. And yet we get teenagers who make a mistake and they're grounded for a week. Well, that's not a minute for every year old they are. So now maybe it needs to be more than 13 minutes, but maybe it shouldn't be more than 13 hours. I've seen kids who get grounded for a week. They get grounded for a month. I've known kids who were grounded for a year. It's not reasonable. Adolescent kids need peer interaction. So you've got to say to yourself, is it age appropriate? What is this child able to learn from? And if it's too long, if the consequence is too long, the child forgets what they even did wrong. Even if you remember them, they don't remember the situation in which they made that decision. They need new opportunities to try to do something right. Other thing you have to ask yourself about enforcement is, are you using the same enforcement or the same consequence for everything? I see so many parents who just use technology as the thing they take away. I'll take away your cell phone. I'll take away your video games. I'll take away. Well, okay, but here's the deal. Not everything children do is related to technology. I'm going to talk again about consequences in a little bit, but there was a little girl who lived down the street from us when I had kids, and every time she did something wrong, her mom would ground her. by about the second week of summer, she had already lost her entire summer vacation. Because no matter what she did, she got grounded for another week. It's like that can't work. It's not enforceable. So we're going to talk about natural or logical consequences. Now, again, for some of you, this is really old hat. You know all of this already. The dilemma with trying to do a foster parent training is we have people who've been foster parents for decades, and then we've got people who are just starting out. And so we're trying to give some information that might be useful to people who are just starting out, but are never a bad reminder for those of us who've been around for a while. Please remember that enforcement, right? What I'm going to do if you don't do it does not equal punishment. They are not the same. So when people say, well, that's no punishment, we're not trying to get you to punish your foster kids. So before we get into that, remember last week when I said, and next week we're going to talk a little bit about who you are, and I promise we talk about you. So one of the things you have to look at is what are my parenting beliefs? Because if I have really strong beliefs about how kids are supposed to act, and then this kid comes into my home who doesn't act that way, if it doesn't fit in with my parenting beliefs, maybe I'm not going to give the child what they need because they don't fit in with my beliefs. Lots of these kids come from different cultures where they have been parented in very different ways. And we like to think there's only one right way to parent. The fact of the matter is, I worked with all kinds of families, and many of the families with whom I worked when I was a family therapist doing treatment for abuse and neglect, you can parent kids in a ton of different ways and still have them grow up to be good citizens. So there's not like there's one way to parent kids correctly. But you're going to have kids who need different kinds of parenting. This is kind of a funny story from my own daughter. She struggled in school. One of my daughters struggled in school. And one time she said, Mom, I know you'd never do this because, you're against it. But, you really wish I'd bring up my grades in math and science. And I hate math and science. But, if you really wanted to motivate me, you'd pay me for better grades. And I started to say, no, I don't believe in paying kids for better grades. And she said, yeah, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't do it. But you see, that's the thing, is that I'm a capitalist. And when you have a 7th grader who can articulate that she's a capitalist, this kid is doing some pretty impressive learning. So I thought, just because I have a parenting belief, lots of other parents reward their kids with money for good grades. So let's give it a try. So I said, okay, I'll give you $5 for this and $5 for that. And then for math and science, I said, if you get an A in math or science, I'll give you $10. She came home 9 weeks later, and her math and science grades were A, and all of her other grades were A. Because again, my strong parenting belief was I'm not going to reward with money, but I had a child who was very motivated by money. So, I had to get over my parenting beliefs. I don't believe she was harmed by it. Wasn't what I would have wanted to do. So I'm asking you, can you get over your parenting beliefs? Can you try something new with a kid who's not responding to what you normally would do? Now, if we don't think we have different parenting beliefs, how often do you disagree with your partner? How many times do you say, well, I think we should do this, and your partner says, no, I think we should do this? How can we disagree if we have different parenting beliefs? There are a ton of different ways to parent kids, and many of them will have good results. So we have to be willing to try different things. Both of you might have good points. If you disagree, you might both have some good points, and you might need to try something that you don't think is going to work. And you say to the child, we don't know how this is going to work. We're going to give this a try. Do you have to change your parenting from child to child? Yeah. We have to be just and fair, but justice and fairness are not about everything being equal. So if I'm really good at something and I do more of that thing because it's easy for me, and my partner is really good at something else and he or she does more of that because it's easy for them, well, that's not equal. We're not doing the same things, but it's just. And so one child might need you to sit with them. One child might need a different kind of reward. Children are different, and that is a life lesson they need to learn. That children are different by age, children are different by temperament, children are different in how they learn. So consistency is not the same as rigidity. What are natural and logical consequences? If a child does something that's unacceptable, there's a consequence. So, kid leaves his bike out, take his bike away. So, you know, it's connected to the bike. You left it outside last night after I told you to put it away, so you don't get your bike today. Your child hits his sister. Well, you know, what's the problem? They're not getting along, right? He hit his sister. So perhaps the logical thing to do is to say, you can't be in the same room with your sister. Now, they're probably fighting over the same toy, but if he has to go to another place, then he doesn't get that toy. But what he learns isn't, you can't have the toy. What he learns is you can't hit your sister. So he screams at you, right? He's reached his frustration threshold and he's screaming at you, I'm not doing it, no more. Okay, logically, you can't say, well, I'm going to take away their homework, right? But logically, you can say they still have to do their homework, but maybe it makes sense that they do their homework later, right? In the meantime, however, you don't give them something they like to do. So when a child says, I'm not doing that, okay, well, you can wash dishes instead. You can clean your room. You can this, you can that, or you can do your homework. But punishing the child may not help with the feeling overwhelmed. So the child may need to just have a break from it. Okay, if you're not ready to do your homework now, you can go in your room and we'll set the timer for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever your child needs to reset, right? And people say, yeah, but that's rewarding him. If he doesn't have to do his homework, he's being rewarded. No, a reward is something you want. It's because he's still going to have to do his homework. But it's a chance for this child to reset. And watch how your child resets. Some kids need time alone and quiet to reset. Some kids need to tinker with Legos to reset. Some kids need to just sit quietly in their room to reset. Some kids need to play to reset. And once they reset emotionally, they're able to come back and do a task. But again, if your parenting belief is a child has to be punished if they don't do what I tell them, then you're going to run into some problems with kids who don't need punishment, but need to reset their emotions. So if he loses it and he can't do his homework right now, and you say, okay, right now is not a good time. I can see that. I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes. You can go play in your room, or you can do da-da-da-da. But when the timer goes off, we're going to come back and do it. People say that rewards their behavior. No. Reward is something a child wants. Not having to do something they don't want to do is not a reward. It's a short escape. How often do you need to escape? How many times do you look at your list of things you got to do that weekend and you go, ugh, I don't want to do that right now. And you do something else first. How many times do you have something on your list and you don't do it at all that weekend? We understand our need to escape. We understand that there are times we're not in the mood. Got to understand that these kids have some of those same feelings, stronger feelings. So consequence is how they learn. Parenting is about teaching. It's about learning. It's not about do it or else. It's not about punishment. And you know how strong, you know why we know this so strongly? Punishment is not learning. If it was, criminals would only go to jail once. In this country, we believe that the way to make people stop doing something would be to put them in jail. Right? Essentially, that's like being grounded, right? Really, grounded. But you know what? That doesn't teach people not to do that thing. In fact, what we know is that most people who end up in jail long-term end up in jail long-term because they are unable to control whatever that urge is or problem is, and society's not safe. But that they will learn when they're there. Some people, yeah, some people learn. Some people, well, my dad beat me once and that taught me. Well, maybe it did for you. But I suspect that for many of you, it was also about either I wanted to please my dad, or it was about my dad was so abusive and I was so frightened. It wasn't that I learned how to be good, I learned how to avoid pain. But that doesn't teach people how to solve problems. So, so I think we're there. We're at our 1 hour mark. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to email us with suggestions that you have for next time. If you have questions, now again, we can't answer specific questions about a specific child, but if you have questions that you think in general, foster parents need more of this, or, you know, how about this? Remembering that we're not medical providers, and, you know, this is about to hit our state in a much bigger way. So over the next week, there's going to be a lot of other things going on for us. We just want to let you know, number one, you are amazing people. You are the most amazing people. And thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do. And most of the time, everything you do is perfect. But in those times where you're struggling, we hope that this in some small way has been helpful to just get you to think about things that you could do or could try. Send us your comments this next week, and I will see you a week from now. Unless, of course, your comments are, get rid of the quirky, cheesy lady. In which case, well, then we do something else. You have a great week, and God bless.
I don't know, Deb, if you want to lead us off with any comments before we dive in. I know there was a number of folks kind of commenting in the chat box with some really great things that are happening in their homes, as well as really sharing some of their struggles. So
I think that I don't have anything in particular to add to that. I think people were giving great suggestions, great ideas, you know, talking about some of the things we were talking about, adding to the things we were talking about.
Yeah.
So I think we should see if the people out there have anything they'd like us to know for next week. Just a reminder again, please email Amy with suggestions for things you would like covered. Several people asked if they could get a copy of the red rules. So I said, Amy's going to make that my homework. We'll see if she can get me to do it. That'll be her test of homeschooling. Right? No, we won't call it homeschooling. We'll call it distance learning, right?
There you go.
So we'll get that out to people. So I did see that, and we will do that. And we have some ideas of things that we could do for future sessions, but we also want to hear from you if you have some things you would like to see. So I think that's all I have for tonight.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess, you know, last week we stuck around a little bit longer than maybe even planned, and let folks really kind of brainstorm some of those ideas. But I know if your house is anything like my house, like Deb's house, I'm guessing we could all maybe say on the same page that we're maybe feeling a little bit more fried than we were a week ago. And, you know, with that being said, I certainly don't mean that we need to hang out here for another 20 minutes to process all of this in the sense of those other ideas. So feel free to email myself, email just kind of the general training center email as well, because we do want to try to be responsive to where you guys are at. Like Deb shared, we certainly probably can't cover every single question. I mean, awesome if we could, but we'll try to generally see what we can do in the couple weeks to come here, because by the sounds of it, this pandemic is not going anywhere, but maybe in more of a scary direction. So we'll see what we can do by all means to kind of offer some continued support. So if you have other thoughts, other questions, feel free to kind of share those in the chat box, email us. I'll get those red rules out to folks after Deb gets on her homework, or however we want to call it. And
we'll see you next week with something.
Yes, we will. I'm guessing probably Thursday night. I haven't ironed that out with Deb, but this seems to kind of work for folks.
Works for me.
So it'll probably be Thursday night. Watch for those emails. I will get the evaluation out here shortly, so you can kind of chime in with those thoughts as well, even through the evaluation, get a copy of the certificate. And I
All right.
think with that, I think like we're good to go for the night. Feel
right.
free to let us go those comments. And if you have other people in your life, not necessarily even just like foster families, if you know other people in your life or even the lives of, you know, your kiddos, things like that, that you think this presentation would help, it's going to be posted on our webinar or our website, I should say. So please feel free to share it with them. We certainly want to share this message as far as we can, because we know we're all maybe needing an extra little bit of support from day to day, hour to hour, maybe minute to minute some days. So
All right. Sounds good.
with that, everyone take care. We will see you next week. And good luck getting through the next week.
Stay safe, be healthy.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Take care. Thank you everyone for their time.